Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to continue the series of setting up the Time Crisis games with the Sinden Lightgun and configuring them with AutoHotkey to work with LaunchBox and Big Box to have things as pick up and play as possible. So today we're going to talk about Time Crisis 2 and Time Crisis 3, which are using the PCSX2 emulator. There's also Time Crisis Crisis Zone, but that has some other quirks and tricks that don't exactly work with this method here. So I'm going to link in the description to a video that has some instructions on setting that up, and then I will make a standalone video at a later date on getting that game to run. But this other video that I link, as I mentioned, should get you up and running if you follow the steps in the description. So let's jump right into it. The first thing is you're going to need a few files. You're going to need the PCSX2 emulator. I am running this Windows binary version, which is also known as the portable version, where everything, all your configurations live in its own folder. This installs it kind of system-wide for Windows, but then stores configuration files in a documents folder where the program files are in the programs directory. So I like to run and keep everything collected in one folder. 1.6.0 is the latest stable, but there's 1.70 and I think even 1.80 beta versions out there. Those do not work with this method. So the maximum version you're going to want is 1.6.0. The next thing you're going to want is the Nuvee USB plugin. So you will want this one here, available from the downloads page, this Nuvee 10/21/2011. The third thing you're going to need is the BIOS for the PS2. Super easy to find. I'm not going to link them, but just poke around and you'll be able to find those BIOS files. And then finally you'll need a copy of the game. So let's go ahead and get started. After you download the PCSX2 and the Nuvee plugin, they're going to come as zip files, and I've got those extracted here into this folder and then the PCSX2 directory. I've got some other files and folders here. We'll talk about those as we go. So we want to do a couple things. I'm doing this on a fresh installation, so if you've never set this up before, this should walk you right through it. If you've already got this running and working fine, you may already have these folders, you may have already set some of this stuff up, and you may want to skip past this just to the AutoHotkey things or for other information. If you don't have these folders, you don't have to do this right from the beginning. You can just add these in and go along with your existing installation. But I'll walk through everything just from the beginning so you see all of the steps to my process. So you see here I've got this folder. This is exactly after you've never installed it before, you've never run it. This is exactly how it comes after you've downloaded it and extracted the zip file. You see this portable INI. This just means it's the portable configuration. It's going to store all of its configs inside this directory. So before we launch it, we want to do a couple things. So we're going to create a new folder called INIs. And we want that there just so our configuration files have a place to go right from the beginning. Specifically the Nuvee plugin, we want it to be able to write its configuration. The next thing we need are those BIOS files. I've already got them saved into a folder here, so I am just going to copy this folder into this directory and paste it here. So we've got a new directory called BIOS with all of my BIOS files in here. And then we're going to create another folder called game configs. And you'll see why in a little while. This is just going to store custom configurations for the games as we set them up. So the final thing we're going to want to do here is install that Nuvee plugin into our plugins directory. So go back here and open this folder, and the one that we're going to want is this Nuvee PS2 USB GunCon keyboard mouse. So we'll open that, go into the bin folder. We're going to grab this DLL, and I'm just going to copy this and paste that into the plugins directory in PCSX2. Just like that. So once we've got those steps completed, we're going to go ahead and launch the emulator. And so this is the first time we're running it. It will create a bunch of extra folders here. And then what you'll get is this first time configurations for all the plugins. So everything should come across. These are all default, but you'll see it should have picked up the Nuvee plugin already. So we're going to leave that just like that. Go ahead and click next. It'll search for your BIOS. I'm using this, the most recent one, the European 2.5.0. Seems to work perfectly fine. So I don't know if you've got different games or different versions of the BIOS. It should be fine. It just needs to match the region of the games that you're playing. So go ahead and click finish. And so now we're up and running. So let's start diving in and setting up some configs. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go to controllers, and I'm going to set up a pad. So for my pad settings, I want this to be direct input, mouse API is disabled, and I'm going to go ahead and click on always hide cursor. Now, if you are using the infinity pedal, like I demoed in one of my previous videos, you should see that show up here under DX VEC USB foot pedal. If you're not using the infinity pedal, don't worry about this. You can ignore this, but you should see it in here. And this allows you actually to run the foot pedal without needing that biped application that I talked about in one of my previous videos. So we're going to go ahead and configure pad 1. I'm leaving everything as default. I'm going to control everything in this game with the Sinden Lightgun or with the pedal. So I'm going to leave all this as default except for that pedal configuration. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to pick my USB foot pedal. And in Time Crisis 2 and Time Crisis 3, the R1 button is the duck behind cover or come out to shoot. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and then I'm just going to press the center button on my foot pedal. And there you go, it bound it to R1. So that's all you need to do to set up the infinity pedal with PCSX2. So go ahead and click apply, click OK, and that'll save that. So now let's go ahead and set up the light gun. So we're going to go here under config USB. The Nuvee plugin will be selected. We want to go to plugin settings. In port 1, we're going to put the GunCon 2. Mouse API is raw input. And this seems to work for me and be required. The swap light gun players 1 and 2. So I'll leave that checked. I'm going to leave port 2 blank. If you have 2 guns, you'll need to configure port 2 as well. But I only have 1, so I'm going to configure just port 1. Once I got that selected, I'll go ahead and click configure. I'll get this screen here. I leave everything on this screen as default. You can change some of the reload methods. I'm not sure exactly what that does. Let's see, off-screen shot, okay. And then you just move the mouse and it'll reload. I use the pedal function or the pump on the gun for Time Crisis, so I just leave things as default here. Trigger, AB, all good. And then down here, you should see that the Nuvee plugin, because you created that Innies folder, it already populated this with the list of games that it supports. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Time Crisis 2. I'm also going to enable this mouse calibration hack. So once I've got all that set, I'm going to go ahead and start up my light gun software. Just run it there. I will turn on my border, and then I'll go ahead and click this acquire button. And you'll see it gives you some instructions. Click OK. No, I'm not using a gamepad. It now wants me to just click on the screen. I'm pointing the gun at the screen, pull the trigger, and it says it found the device ready to use. So I'm gonna click OK, OK, and OK. And I'm gonna get rid of my border here. So now that I've got this configured, I want to actually set up a couple other things. I'm going to go in here into video, and I'm going to go into my core GS settings, and actually down here under the GS window. This is completely up to you. I know this is sacrilege to some people actually making it widescreen, but I like it set up this way. 1280 by 1024. That works best for my display. You can do however you want. And then what I do is I always hide mouse cursor, leave those set up, and then I swap these. So I make sure that the default to full screen mode is on, but this double click toggles full screen is off. So with the light gun, right, you're clicking usually quickly, and if that double click is detected, it'll start swapping you in and out of full screen mode. So we don't want that. So make sure that you disable that. That's all I need to set up in here. The other thing I'm going to do, and we'll go into more detail about this, is under the video plugin settings, I set mine to OpenGL. I actually, this is completely up to you based on the performance of your machine. You can actually go up much higher than this, but I'm just going to go to 720p. And then down here under shader configuration, I'm going to enable the shaders, and I'm actually going to point it to a yet to be created file called active shader. .ini, and you'll see why in a few minutes. I'll go ahead and set that up and click OK. So now we have everything configured as we want for Time Crisis 2. So let's go into this game configs folder. I'm going to create a new folder in here, and we're just going to name it Time Crisis 2. We'll go back to our inis folder, and I'm just going to take all of these, copy them, and move them into Time Crisis 2. So now I have saved off the configuration for Time Crisis 2 into this other directory. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and configure Time Crisis 3 as well. So I go into config, USB, plugin settings, GunCon 2, all of this stays the same. I'll go to configure, but in here, I'm going to go ahead and switch this to Time Crisis 3. Go ahead and do the acquire procedure again. Turn my border on. Click OK. Nope. Click no. Point at the screen, pull the trigger. Okay, and then I can turn my border off. So now back in here, click OK, and now I've set up Time Crisis 3. So I'll go back here to my inis, copy everything here again, game configs, new folder, Time Crisis 3, paste all of that in there. So be careful with this a little bit if you're using this emulator to run all kinds of different games. What's the step we're going to take a little bit later to get this to launch automatically is going to overwrite any existing configs with the ones for Time Crisis. So I'm not sure if you need all of these. You may just need the GunCon profiles and setup, and you can leave the PCSX2 UI and VM, the SPU, your lily pad. You may want to save and not overwrite that. Same with the GSDX and these two, which I'm not sure what they do. But now that we've got these saved off, we're going to go ahead and set up some shaders. So PCSX2 supports shaders by default, and it comes with this directory with this GSDX file. This is the actual application, I believe, and then the settings file. So what we're going to do is, I showed you before, we pointed the shader config to a file called activeshader.ini. So in here, I'm going to copy the default one, and I'm going to name this activeshader.ini. So now I'm going to go in and edit this guy. And you'll see it's just a text configuration file. So this top section, you turn things on by flipping the 0 to a 1. And you'll see by default it already has these two turned on. And then you configure things down below. So what we want to do, at least for my case, and you can play around with this, is I'm going to turn off all of my shaders. So that's it. So my active shader is just everything disabled. So now I'm going to copy this and create a new copy called default shader. And then I'm going to create another copy, but this one we're going to call border widescreen. And these names are completely made up. They do need to match, though, what was configured in PCSX2 and then what you configure in your AutoHotkey script. But in this border widescreen file, we're going to go and edit this guy, and this is where we'll actually make some changes. So you'll see here in the very last one in this list is px_border. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on. And then the very last thing in this configuration list is the configuration for that border. So what we want is at least for mine, and this may depend on your setup, but this works for me, I want a 12 by 12 pixel border, and I want it white. So 255, 255, 255. And that's it. So this will generate a 12 pixel border around the outside in solid white. We'll go ahead and close this. So now we're actually ready to start things. However, I want this, when I start up my game, to be the active shader. So in this case, I'm going to manually do it, and you'll see how we do this automated in the AutoHotkey, but I'm going to go ahead and just delete this active shader file, make a copy of this, and rename it active shader. So now the contents of this are the contents of this. So let's go back. I've already got this open. Let's go ahead and launch our game. And so we get our border, the game launches, and then we get our calibration screen. So I'm going to go ahead, and if you left the crosshairs on, you'll see the crosshair moving at this point, but I'm just going to use the sights on the gun to line it up and shoot the center of the screen. So now that I've got that, I can see the crosshairs moving, and I can just make sure that I got it accurately and it's matching up. So now I'm going to pull the pump on the gun and go ahead and go through the menu of setting up the memory cards. Alright, so that's all completed. We're in the game. So now, I want this to just boot up immediately without having to do that calibration. So I'm going to skip ahead just to where I'm at the main menu, and then I'm going to press the F1 key. And in the top left, you see save state to slot 0. So we've just locked in the current state of this game at that menu screen and saved it into slot 1. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close the game. Just go ahead and kill it here. And now I'm just going to relaunch it. And that hide mouse cursor is now running because I started the game. But it remembered which one was the last game that I played. So it's just going to boot into that game again. Restart. So what you'll see is it'll boot up. Border comes up. And we should get the calibration again. But if I press the F3 key, it takes me right to the menu, ready to play. Works beautifully. So now let's go ahead and try to automate this with AutoHotkey. So we're going to go ahead and close the emulator here. And I will show you a script that I've already done that starts all this up. So the first lines up here are just boilerplate stuff you get when you create a new AutoHotkey file. The next lines, remember we saved off those configuration files. This is going to take those configs and copy all of the files in that directory into the innies directory, which PCSX2 is actually going to use, and overwrites them. Next, we take that border widescreen shader configuration and copy that to a file named active shader. So we make the border shader active. Next, we check if the Lightgun exe is running. If it is, we kill it and then relaunch it. I do this in all of my scripts just in case something is left over from a previous game run. We can start up in a fresh configuration. And then finally here, we run the game. So run PCSX2, pointed to this bin file. If yours is an ISO, point to that. Passing in the full screen argument, no GUI parameter as well. And then this is kind of important. We set the current directory context to that PCSX2 directory. Wait 6 seconds. Make sure that the PCSX2 window is active. Wait 1 second after that, and then these 3 lines just send the F3 command. So this will give it about 7 seconds to start up, and then press F3 to immediately launch that save state. So it bypasses the calibration, it bypasses any setup, and just drops you right into the menu with everything already calibrated. Then here when we're done, if I press the escape key, we copy the default shader with everything disabled back to active. And you may not want to do this step if your installation is only for Lightgun games and you always want the border up. But for my case, my installation is running Lightgun and not non-Lightgun games. So I want to replace the disabled shaders after I exit the game. And then I kill the Lightgun app and I kill PCSX2 before closing the AutoHotkey script. So if you want to see that in action, I can just run this. There's the game, and there we go. Jumped right to the save state. And then if I press escape, everything goes away. So that's pretty much it for setting things up. From here, this AutoHotkey file, if you look at how I've set up the RPCS3 games, in that video I show how you can take this AutoHotkey file and just drop it into LaunchBox. And then this will pick up the game and you can configure it from there and create your entry in LaunchBox or Big Box, so that double clicking on it in the front end would just fire off this AutoHotkey script to run the game. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Leave a like or subscribe if this helped you out. I will follow this up with a Time Crisis Zone video in the next few days or week, once I clean up my launching process. And other than that, thank you for watching.